On a rainy Tokyo morning, he asked if the seat was taken. Neither of them knew it would change everything. If you believe small moments can change lives too, support this channel. Like the video, subscribe for more stories like this, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. The rain that morning didn't just fall. It pressed itself against the windows, whispering a steady rhythm to a city already awake. Tokyo's streets glistened in shades of steel and neon as umbrellas bloomed and folded in a hurried ballet. Inside a small cafe in Kagurazaka, the kind with fogged windows and shelves stacked with mismatched mugs, Clara Evans traced her pen across an empty page. She wasn't sketching anything in particular, just lines, loops, fragments of thought, the kind of drawing that comes when you're not sure what to say. She'd been in Japan long enough to understand its rhythms, but some mornings still felt heavier, lonelier. That day, all she wanted was quiet. The cafe was packed, though. Rain always did that, turned every seat into a sanctuary. Chairs scraped, cups clinked, conversations blurred into a hum. Clara had found a small table by the window, her sketchbook open, her coffee cooling beside her. She adjusted her cream-knit sweater, tucked her chestnut hair behind one ear, and let her gaze rest on the rain streaking the glass. A shadow fell across her table.
"Sumimasen, is this seat taken?" She looked up. A man stood there, tall, early 40s, dark hair neatly combed back with a silver thread at the temples. There was something composed about him, almost too composed, as if every movement had been measured before it happened. He wore a tailored navy coat, and in his hand a cup of coffee, still steaming. For a second, Clara hesitated. She had been holding on to this quiet corner like it was her own bubble, but there was something in his eyes, a polite weariness, the kind that doesn't ask, just waits. She closed her sketchbook halfway, shifted her bag to the side, and nodded softly. "Please, sit." He inclined his head in thanks, the gesture small, almost ceremonial, before sitting down. And then, silence. Not an awkward one, but the kind of silence that fills a room and changes its shape. Clara kept sketching faintly, the tip of her pen moving like it was afraid to break the moment. The man cradled his cup, his gaze fixed on the rain outside, as though the city might offer him an answer if he stared long enough. Minutes passed like that. No names, no small talk, just two strangers sharing a table while the world outside blurred. When he finally stood, his chair scraped the wooden floor softly. He offered a brief nod, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Arigato," he said quietly. "Thank you." And then, without fanfare, he was gone. It was only after the bell above the door chimed and the rain swallowed his footsteps that Clara noticed it. Next to his empty cup, a sketchbook rested on the table, its cover worn, edges frayed, like it had been held 1,000 times. She reached for it, her fingers hesitating on the textured surface. There was no name on the front, no note, just the weight of something forgotten, or perhaps left behind on purpose. Clara hesitated before touching it, as if the sketchbook might hum with the warmth of the stranger's hands still lingering on the cover. The worn leather felt soft, almost tired, the corners bent from years of being opened and closed. She turned it over once, twice. No name, no card tucked inside, just that quiet mystery. She looked around the cafe, but no one seemed to notice the forgotten book. The rain outside swallowed the world into gray, and she felt as if the small table by the window had been cut off from time. Slowly, she pulled the sketchbook closer,
her fingers grazing its surface before she flipped it open. The first page stole her breath. It was a drawing. A boy, maybe 7 or 8, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a small piano in front of him. The lines were delicate yet certain, each stroke carrying intention. Around the boy's head, floating like fragile petals, were tiny musical notes, not on a staff, not constrained by any rules, just drifting free, as if the music existed only in his world. Beneath the drawing, in a neat, firm hand, were words written in Japanese, the graphite pressed deep into the paper. Clara tilted her head, mouthing the words she could read. "I always hear you, even when you don't say anything." She stared at the sentence. It wasn't just a dedication, it was a confession. Turning the pages, she found more drawings, each more intimate than the last. The same boy appeared again and again, his black hair falling into his eyes, his face carrying a seriousness that felt too heavy for someone so young. In one, he stared out of a rain-streaked window, his small hands pressed to the glass. In another, he crouched on the floor, colored pencils scattered around him, his focus absolute. There were no adults in these drawings, only the boy. Sometimes a shadow of a hand, or the faint curve of a figure blurred at the edge of the page, always distant, never fully drawn. Clara's throat tightened. Each page felt like she was being invited into a space that wasn't hers, as if she had stumbled into a diary written without words. She brushed the side of one sketch, feeling the slight texture where the pencil pressed harder, where emotion had turned into pressure. She whispered softly to no one, "Who are you?" Her coffee had long gone cold. The cafe's chatter faded into nothing. All that existed was the quiet weight of the sketchbook in her hands and the question that clung to her chest. Who was the boy? And why did his drawings feel like they were waiting for her? The rain had stopped by the next morning, but the streets of Tokyo still carried its memory, puddles reflecting signs and power lines like fragments of another world. Clara returned to the cafe, the sketchbook wrapped carefully in a cloth bag, its weight strangely heavier now, as if every drawing inside had begun to whisper to her. The cafe looked almost the same as the day before, fogged windows, shelves stacked with mismatched mugs, the smell of coffee and warm bread. Only one thing was different. He wasn't there. Clara took the same table by the window, opened her sketchbook, and pretended to draw. Every time the bell above the door chimed, her eyes lifted. An elderly man with a folded umbrella, a group of students laughing softly, a woman in a suit balancing her phone and a paper bag, but not him. She stayed for an hour, then another. The coffee cooled in front of her again, untouched. She tried to tell herself she wasn't waiting, that she was just here for the warmth, for the quiet hum of voices in a language she was still learning to fully understand. But she was waiting. By the third day, even the barista had noticed. "Good morning," the young woman said, her hair tied in a messy bun, freckles scattered across her nose. She spoke a mix of Japanese and hesitant English, trying to find the words. "You looking for someone?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. She described him as best she could. Tall, dark hair with a touch of gray, a quiet kind of presence. The barista tilted her head, thinking, "Ah, yes, he comes sometimes. Always same coffee. Very quiet. Always to go. Never sit." Clara's heart sank a little. "Never sits?" The barista shook her head. "Yesterday, first time, he sit here."
Clara traced the rim of her cup. First time, and maybe the last. "Do you know his name?" she asked softly, though she already guessed the answer. The barista gave an apologetic smile. "No, but," she pointed toward the window. "He leave in car. Black, with driver. Expensive car." Clara glanced outside, imagining the scene. The rain, the black car, the man with the coffee in hand already disappearing into the city before she even noticed he was gone. That night, she opened the sketchbook again in her apartment. The boy's eyes stared back from the pages, serious and weightless, and Clara felt something tug at her chest. She couldn't just return the sketchbook by accident. She needed to return it by intention. The next morning, she came back to the cafe with a plan. She ordered the same coffee, sat at the same table, and pulled one of her own drawings from her bag. A small watercolor of a girl holding a pink balloon, smiling toward the sky. On the back, in delicate handwriting, she wrote only one line: "If you come back, thank you." She handed it to the barista with a small bow. "If he returns, the man with the navy coat and the coffee with no sugar, can you give him this?" The barista smiled and tucked the drawing safely behind the counter. Clara sat back down, her heart strangely light, and watched as the clouds gathered again over Tokyo. Somewhere in the city, she thought, the stranger with the sketchbook might be holding his coffee, might be seeing her drawing, might be wondering who she was. The drawing had been left at the cafe for 3 days. Clara returned each morning, quietly scanning the tables, hoping to see that familiar navy coat, but he never came. The barista would shake her head softly as if saying, "Not yet." On the 4th evening, as the light in Tokyo faded into the amber glow of lanterns and street signs, Clara was at home, rinsing her brushes, when she heard it, a knock. It was soft, almost hesitant, but it startled her anyway. She wiped her hands on a cloth and walked to the door, heart beating a little faster. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, he was there. Riku Hayashi stood in the narrow hallway of her apartment building, holding the sketchbook in one hand. His coat was the same dark navy she remembered, drops of rain clinging to the fabric. In the other hand, he held the watercolor she had left for him at the cafe. Clara froze. She hadn't imagined this moment would happen here, like this. He bowed slightly, not deep, but enough to make it formal, respectful. "You drew this?" he asked in quiet English, lifting the watercolor between his fingers. She nodded, her voice barely finding itself. "Yes." His expression softened, the faintest smile at the corner of his lips, something almost shy. "It surprised me," he said, the words slow, measured. "I didn't think anyone would care enough to return this." He held up the sketchbook.
Clara hesitated, then smiled gently. It didn't feel like something to leave behind. For a moment, they just stood there, two strangers with the weight of 1,000 unspoken things between them. "Thank you," he said at last, bowing again, deeper this time. Clara glanced at the sketchbook, then back at him. "It belongs to you." He nodded, but didn't take it immediately. Instead, his gaze drifted to the rain-slick streets behind him, as if searching for words he wasn't used to saying. "It's the only place I keep drawings of my son," he admitted, his voice lower now. Clara blinked. "Your son?" He nodded once. "Haruki." The name felt like an exhale, a piece of his life gently handed to her. Silence fell again, but it wasn't empty. It carried weight, like the rain outside, like the sketchbook between them. Then he gave a small nod toward the book in her hands. Keep looking if you want. Just take care of it." And with that, he stepped back, the rain catching his coat again, the city swallowing him into its evening hum. Clara stood at the door long after he'd gone, the sketchbook pressed against her chest. The apartment felt different now, the silence thicker, not lonely, but charged with something she couldn't yet name. A week passed before Clara heard from him again. No knocks this time, just an email. The address was unfamiliar, but the message was unmistakably his. "If you have time, come. Haruki would like to meet you." There was no greeting, no closing, only an address. She hesitated. The man she barely knew had invited her into a space that was clearly much more than walls and windows. Still, the next morning, she found herself on a train heading toward Setagaya, where the city softened into quiet streets lined with persimmon trees. The address led her to a tall wooden gate, the kind that seemed to belong to another era. She pressed the buzzer. The gate clicked open without a word. The house was simple but elegant, with stone paths slick from last night's rain and a garden that seemed to breathe calm into the air. It wasn't the kind of wealth that showed off. It was the kind that whispered. The door slid open before she could knock. An older woman appeared, Taya-san. Later she would learn her name, her gray hair neatly tied back, an apron around her waist, and a ring of keys at her side. "You are Clara-san," she said gently in accented English. "Please, come." Inside, the house felt like stepping into stillness. The scent of tatami mats and hinoki wood filled the air. Shoji screens filtered the winter light into soft gold. Every corner felt intentional, not sterile, but held together by care. And then she saw him, Haruki. The boy sat cross-legged on the floor of the living room, a small fortress of colored pencils and blank pages around him. His jet-black hair fell slightly into his eyes, and his expression was calm, but sharp, as if he noticed more than he would ever say. He didn't look up immediately. His hand kept moving, sketching slow, deliberate lines on the paper in front of him. "Haruki," Riku's voice called softly from another room. The boy's head lifted. He didn't speak, but he looked. First at his father, then at Clara. Something unspoken passed between them. Clara crouched slightly, her smile careful, respectful. "Hello, Haruki," she said softly. The boy didn't answer, but he reached to his side, picked up a green pencil, and then, with the smallest gesture, offered it to her. It was such a simple thing, a colored pencil in the hand of a child, but for Clara it felt like an invitation. She sat down on the tatami beside him, her knees folding under her, and took the pencil gently. Haruki pushed a blank sheet of paper toward her. Riku leaned against the doorway, watching, his expression calm, but his eyes softer than she had ever seen. It was the first time in years, Clara would later realize, that someone new had been allowed into this house, this silence, this fragile world built of sketches and shadows. The visits began quietly, almost unintentionally. Clara hadn't planned to return so soon, but somehow her steps kept leading back to that wooden gate. Each time she came, Haruki was there, waiting, though never in the way most children wait. He didn't run to the door, he didn't call her name. He just looked up when she entered, and in that steady gaze, there was something that felt like recognition. The boy drew constantly. His small hands moved across paper with a focus most adults could only dream of. He drew trees without leaves, birds without cages, pianos without sound. Clara would kneel beside him, pulling her own pens and brushes from her bag. At first, she only watched.
careful not to disturb the ritual. But one day, Haruki pushed a sheet toward her again, his eyes fixed on her hand until she picked up a pencil. She began to sketch, simple things, a balloon floating away, a cat curled on a windowsill, the outline of a rain-soaked street. And Haruki, without a word, started adding to her drawings. A balloon became a kite, the cat grew wings, the rain turned into tiny music notes falling from the sky. They weren't just drawing, they were talking in a language that didn't need sound. From the hallway, Riku would stand and watch. His presence was always composed, but something about his face had shifted. There was a softness in the way he watched his son, and a curiosity in the way his gaze lingered on Clara. One afternoon, while Haruki filled a page with a field of sunflowers, Clara noticed an unfinished canvas leaning against the wall. A manga storyboard, faint pencil lines, but no ink. She looked at it, then at Riku. "Yours?" He nodded, almost reluctantly. "I used to draw," he said, before... The sentence trailed off, the silence heavy, but not hostile. Clara touched the edge of the board lightly. "You should finish it." Riku's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but something close. "Maybe. Together." The idea wasn't forced. It hung in the air naturally, as if it had been waiting for someone to say it. And so it began, the thought of a manga without words, a story told only through Haruki's images, Clara's colors, and Riku's structure. The three of them sat at that low table for hours, pages spread out like stepping stones between them. Haruki's drawings became the heart of it, and Clara shaped their world with ink and watercolor. It was slow, it was fragile, but it felt like something alive was blooming in that house, something that hadn't dared to grow there in years. The garden behind Riku's house was always quiet, a stillness that seemed to calm even the restless thoughts Clara sometimes carried with her. That afternoon, though, that stillness broke. Clara and Haruki were seated at the low table in the living room, colored pencils scattered like confetti across the tatami. Haruki was drawing a fox curled beneath a tree. Clara was adding tiny flowers along its tail. Everything felt calm, until she heard the sharp, crisp sound of heels on stone coming up the garden path. The sound stopped just outside the sliding door. It opened with a soft shh. A woman stepped in. She didn't belong to the soft light of that room. Everything about her was precise. Her tailored cream suit, the sleek twist of her black hair, the subtle fragrance that cut through the smell of tatami and tea. Even before she spoke, the air shifted. At the genkin, she slipped off her heels and placed them neatly side by side, as etiquette demanded. In stockinged feet, she stepped across the tatami floor. Her steps were soundless. Her presence was not. Her eyes found Clara immediately. Not with curiosity, but with something sharper. "So," she said in flawless Japanese, her voice as cool as porcelain, "you must be the illustrator." Clara hesitated, unsure if she should bow or stay seated. "Yes," she said softly, "I'm Clara." The woman's smile was polite, but her words weren't. "You've been spending quite a lot of time here." Before Clara could answer, a voice came from the hallway. "Riku." Riku stood in the doorway, his dark hair catching the soft light, his expression unreadable. "Reina," the woman replied. She said his name as if testing its weight. "I thought it was time we spoke." Haruki stopped drawing. His small black crayon froze mid-line. His eyes flicked between them, silent but tense. Clara glanced at Riku. "Who is she?" she asked quietly, unsure if she was meant to hear the answer. Riku hesitated only a fraction before he said it. "Reina Sugimoto. We were engaged a long time ago." The word hung heavy. Engaged. Clara's chest tightened. Reina's smile curved slightly, but her tone didn't soften. "I was away for some time," she said, her eyes flicking over to Clara again. But I still care about this family, about Haruki. She took another step closer to the table. Children need stability, not strangers who sketch their way into their lives. Clara's hand stilled over the pencil she was holding. The words struck like small stones, quiet but bruising. Riku's jaw flexed, but his voice remained calm. Clara is helping Haruki. Reina tilted her head. Her smile never reached her eyes. Helping, she asked, the single word sharp as glass, or replacing. The silence in the room changed, no longer gentle but taut. Haruki quietly picked up another crayon, black again, and began to draw quickly, his little hand moving almost frantically. Clara glanced at the page, a tall figure with sharp shoulders, drawn in thick, dark strokes, standing in the garden. Her heart ached. Reina set her designer bag on the table. The leather whispered against the wood. "Think carefully, Riku," she said, her voice steady, almost rehearsed. "Think about what you're inviting into this house. Some things aren't so easily undone." Then she turned to Clara. "You'll understand if I speak plainly. Not everyone belongs here." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Reina turned back to the entryway, her movements graceful, deliberate. When she stepped onto the Genkan, she slipped her heels back on. The sharp click of them striking stone echoed through the garden as she walked away. No one spoke for a long moment. Haruki's black crayon scratched across the paper one last time before he set it down. His drawing showed the figure in the garden, now blurred with heavy shading. With quiet hands, he slid the green pencil toward Clara, the one he always used to ask her to draw with him. This time, the gesture felt different. It wasn't an invitation. It was fear. Clara picked up the pencil, her fingers trembling slightly, and for the first time, she wondered if she really did belong here. Clara didn't return the next day. She didn't return the day after that either. One day turned into two into 5. By the end of the week, she had lost count of how many mornings she woke up, stared at her sketchbook, and told herself, not today. 7 days, 7 mornings where she stayed away. Her small apartment, usually a refuge, felt like it was shrinking. Reina's words echoed there, bouncing off the walls like unwelcome guests. Not everyone belongs here. Clara tried to paint, but every brushstroke faltered. She tried to sketch, but her pencils felt heavy. Even the rain outside, which she usually loved, sounded different, harsher somehow. She thought of Haruki more than she wanted to admit, wondered if he was still drawing, wondered if he noticed she wasn't there. She also thought of Reina, her perfect hair, her flawless words, her icy smile, and the way she had looked at her like Clara was temporary, like Clara didn't have the right to be in that house. And maybe, Clara feared, she didn't. Her phone stayed silent all week. Until it didn't. On the 8th morning, a message appeared. "Clara-san, Haruki drew this for you." No greeting, no explanation, just those words and an image attached. Clara's heart thudded as she opened it. It was Haruki's drawing. The paper was filled with soft gray lines. A small figure, unmistakably Clara, sat outside the house on the Engawa, knees pulled up, head bent. Inside the house, behind a shoji screen, a boy sat cross-legged, looking out at her. In the corner, written in uneven English letters, "Come." Clara's chest tightened.
She stared at the drawing until her phone went dark, then lit up again with the same image, as if the boy's silent plea couldn't fade. She grabbed her bag and left. The train to Setagaya felt longer than it ever had before. Her reflection in the window looked almost like a stranger, pale, tired, unsure, but her heart knew where it needed to be. When she reached the house, she hesitated at the wooden gate. Before she could press the buzzer, the gate slid open. Riku was there. He wasn't in his navy coat this time. He looked different, lighter somehow, but there was something serious in his eyes. "I should have told you sooner," he said quietly, without greeting. "Reina and we were engaged, once, years ago." He paused, the words deliberate, as if each one was being chosen carefully. "She came here because she thinks she still has a claim, but she doesn't." Clara said nothing, just listened. "I let her words stay in this house too long," Riku continued, his voice steady but low. "That was my mistake, and I won't let it happen again." For the first time, the weight of Reina's shadow seemed to lift. And then Haruki appeared behind his father, holding another drawing. This one was brighter. 3 figures sat at a low table, the boy in the middle, the adults on each side. The empty chair that had haunted so many of his pages was gone. Haruki held the drawing out to Clara, his black eyes steady and sure. She felt her throat tighten. Words weren't needed. Presence was. She stepped inside. The air in the house felt different when Clara returned. Lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Haruki's drawing lay on the table, the one with the 3 figures, and no empty chair, and beside it were stacks of new sheets, waiting to be filled. Haruki was already seated on the tatami, his colored pencils neatly lined up like little soldiers. When Clara sat beside him, he didn't look at her, but he reached for her hand and placed a blue pencil in her palm. That was his way of saying, "Stay." They began to draw again, but this time, something shifted. Haruki sketched a tree. Clara added the weaves. Haruki drew a bird. Clara painted the shadow of its wings. And then Riku, quietly watching from the Engawa, finally sat down at the table. He picked up a pencil. Clara almost didn't notice at first. His movements were tentative, like someone touching an instrument after years of silence. He sketched the outline of a piano, the lines clean and sure, despite the hesitation in his hand. Haruki's eyes lit up. He grabbed a crayon and filled the air above the piano with floating music notes, just like in the pages of the sketchbook Clara had first found. Riku looked at the drawing for a long moment. "It's been years since I opened it," he said softly. "Opened what?" Clara asked. He glanced toward a sliding door at the end of the hall. When they slid it open, the air shifted again. Inside was a music room, or what had been one. Dust clung to the edges of the tatami, and in the center sat a grand piano, its black surface muted by years of untouched silence. Riku rested his hand on it, his fingers tracing the lid. "My wife played every day," he said, his voice almost breaking for the first time. "When she died, I couldn't hear it anymore. I couldn't even look at it." Clara didn't speak. Riku slowly opened the piano. The hinge creaked softly, and for a moment, no one moved. Then he sat down. The first note was hesitant, like a breath held too long. The second, firmer. Slowly, a melody emerged, not polished, not perfect, but real. Haruki stepped closer, his small hands hovering over the keys. He didn't press them. Instead, he moved his fingers in the air, mimicking the music, like he could feel the sound without hearing it fully. Clara knelt beside him, watching his face change, his black eyes reflecting the light of the room. When the melody faded, the silence that followed didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt alive. Haruki looked at his father, then at Clara. He picked up a pencil and quickly drew. The piano, 3 people sitting around it, and above their heads, notes floating like lanterns. For the first time, he smiled while he drew. And in that moment, they all understood. They weren't just making a manga. They were building a language, one made of lines, colors, and moments like this.
The first copies of the manga arrived quietly. No launch event, no speeches, no red carpets. Just a plain cardboard box on Riku's doorstep. Inside it, a stack of books, with a simple cover, a boy with closed eyes, surrounded by notes floating like falling petals. The title read only, "The Silence That Speaks." Clara held one in her hands, running her fingers over the embossed lines. It didn't feel like just paper and ink. It felt like the sum of every quiet moment they had shared. Every sketch Haruki had drawn, every pencil Clara had picked up, every pause in which Riku finally let himself feel again. The manga didn't shout. It whispered. And somehow, that made its voice louder. Soon, parents began writing letters. Teachers sent messages. A woman from Sapporo wrote that her son, who barely spoke, had drawn for the first time in months after reading it. A father in Osaka said the book taught him how to listen to the silences in his daughter's world. It spread without noise, like rain seeps into the ground, unseen but unstoppable. Weeks later, Riku sent Clara a message. "Meet us, same cafe." The same cafe where everything had started. Clara arrived early, her sketchbook under her arm, just as she had that first day. The rain was lighter now, more of a mist, soft enough to blur the street signs and paint halos around the lanterns outside. Inside, she spotted them immediately. Riku sat at the table by the window, the one they had once shared in silence. Haruki was next to him, a colored pencil in hand, his small body leaning over a fresh sheet of paper. When he saw her, he didn't run. Haruki never ran, but his face lit up and he patted the empty chair beside him. Clara smiled and sat down. There were 3 cups on the table, 2 steaming, 1 waiting. Haruki slid his drawing toward her. It was the cafe, the very one they sat in now, sketched in careful lines. 3 figures sat at the same table, and above them, the cafe's hanging lamp wasn't just a lamp. He had drawn it as a glowing heart. On the back, written in the uneven but determined strokes of a child, "Today we sit together forever." Clara felt her throat tighten, her hand covering her mouth as her eyes stung. Riku reached across the table, his hand brushing hers, a quiet smile softening the lines of his face. They didn't talk about the book or Reina or what would come next. They didn't need to. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of shared sketches, of unspoken promises, of a future that didn't need to be rushed. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. Inside, 3 cups of coffee steamed softly, and a boy kept drawing, his notes and colors spilling into the world. And at that small cafe table in Tokyo, a stranger was no longer a stranger. If this story touched your heart, help us keep sharing moments like this. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Every message helps this community grow and brings more stories to life.